I keep thinking if leaders specifically, because we're talking about culture, right? And leadership at the top from a culture perspective, if they would embrace change not as a project or a thing that they need to support, but rather integrate that change into the culture, I think then that's where you would have more of the peers not feeling like, well, that's not my role. And so I just think kind of shifting the mindset of the purpose of change is not for change itself, but what does it do to the culture of your organization? You might get more players.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper. I'm the CEO and managing partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today, I've got a great cast. Tee Thorsen and M.E. Clagett are leadership catalysts at LAITHOS. And I've also got Susan Richards, the Sapient Insights Group founder, one of my best friends. Tee and M.E. work closely with us at Sapient on all things leadership and culture. So we've got a really tight partnership and we're doing some fun things, and we're going to talk about some of those things today. Welcome, ladies. It's great to have you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I am super excited about this because we want to talk about one of the things that the three of you have been embarking upon related to leadership and culture specifically. I know you guys have been working on a lot of different things, but you're also working on a paper that just released last week at HR Tech. And we've been talking around this a lot, but I think there's some things that we really need to get to in this conversation. We've also been talking a lot about AI, like it's taken up all the oxygen in the room. But frankly, without leadership and a strong culture, none of this would even be possible. And so those are the things I want to talk about. I want to talk about what you guys learned in this process and sort of, tease this out, because this is going to be, by the time you hear this podcast, you will have this paper available and can get your hands on it through our website. So does that sound like a good plan to you guys?
Yes.
All right, then let's get into the huddle. So I mentioned AI only because everything I'm talking about today, the word AI just constantly comes up. And even in my last few podcasts, it seems like we've devolved into this whole conversation about what about AI and what about AI? So my challenge for you guys on this podcast is that we do not say AI if at all possible. Every time we say AI, we have to put $1 in the swear jar.
So we might have plenty of money for our next party by the end of this conversation then.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So I actually called it the $1 in the party jar, but then I was like, well, maybe we should just refer to AI as the swear word. And I started to say, hey, every time we say AI, we have to take a drink, but it's a little early in the day for that. So
yeah, we'll do that at happy hour.
And I'm just wondering, Teri, does that mean you already owe $4 in the jar?
I owe probably 5 or 6. I don't know how many times I've said it, and I don't have a counter on here. So somebody's going to have to keep track so we know how much money we have at the end of this session.
Yeah.
We can put Summer on that. She's really good at keeping up with things.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have that. We'll have them count when they listen to the recording. So, yeah. So I know there's a lot of things we know because they show up in the analytics, like strong profitability and customer sat scores and our ability as an organization to innovate. But I feel like what's lurking below the surface is how we did all that. Like it's not magic, right? And it's not just because maybe we have the smartest people or the best ideas. So I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about here. Susan, I know, leadership is a key component of all of this, right? And I'm wondering from your perspective, why was now the right time to write about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our clients have been asking us for guidance and leadership on leadership for the last 5 or 6 years. And it was interesting that we would work with a client in those big transformations, change management, technology transformations, mergers, acquisitions. And we always led with making the people that we were working with stronger when we left than when we got there. And our clients started to realize that once we left, there was a bit of a leadership vacuum, and wanted to find out how they could engage our capabilities to help them with leadership going forward. So we started toying with this idea of a leadership culture and change practice in 24. And I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve. We saw lots of disruptive things happening just in the environment, in the world that we work in, and realized that we needed to prepare our leaders for what we knew was coming down the pike, whether that was something that was geopolitical or disruptive technology that might be entering our world or getting stronger in our world, and just the general change in the way we get work done. So we know that leadership is really that foundation of how do you get through all of the crazy things that are happening to us and are going to happen. And so we felt very strongly that we needed to get ahead of that curve and start providing great leadership, change, and culture content and guidance to our clients.
Yeah, there's really a light, I think, being shined on it right now, and it's just pivotal to this process and everything that all of the change that we're going through, and we'll get to some of that in a little bit. But T, you've been in this business a while, and I know you're also a coach, and you're working with leaders at the highest level in the organization as well as leaders across the organization. Is the pace of change, the things that we're going through right now, is that impacting the skills that we need from a leadership perspective? Or what are you seeing as different there?
Well, when I actually think about the pace of change, especially given this audience, I could say that the shelf life of technical skills is actually shrinking. But what needs to last isn't, a particular tool or a platform. It's actually the ability to learn, to adapt, and also to stay curious. Leaders today, they need resilience and they need to be comfortable with ambiguity. The big topic of emotional intelligence, or really self-awareness, right? And the impact that you have on others is more important than ever now. In fact, I'd actually argue that influencing versus having authority over is actually more of a defining skill nowadays of leadership. We say that you are a leader, whether you manage people or whether you're an individual contributor. So leadership itself is how any individual shows up and wants to have an impact and expand their influence with others. But at the end of the day, if you can't adapt and bring people along with you, then the speed of change will just simply outpace you, which then has an impact, obviously, on the skills. But I think the bottom line, and we talk about this a lot here, is focusing on the human side of any kind of change or skill is more important. And some of our audience may disagree because you're technology oriented, and yes, that's important, but we can't forget that the human is what's going to make or break the use of technology.
Yeah. It's a really good point because we are all leaders in our own right, right? And how we progress in that leadership path really is a lot dependent on ourselves and our growth and where we want to be at the end of the day, right?
Yes. And we tend to work with a lot of high achieving people, right? They want to get a lot done. They want to have the results. And what we know is high achieving people don't have a lot of time and don't take a lot of time for themselves. And that's the key to leadership. which is investing time in really being aware of yourself and of others in order to be purposeful. And that's what we loved when, Sapient approached Emmy and I and said, we have a gap where I think we can partner together. We've been in the leadership space for many years, as you said, Teri. You're making me feel a little old, but leadership is, as Emmy always says, as old as time. And not a lot of things change. It's the application of it and it's the focus of it. So we're thrilled to be part of this conversation and to have contributed to the paper that a lot of people will be hopefully reading in the near future.
Yeah, that reminds me of something, Susan, you said recently, what's old is new again. And I couldn't agree with that more. Like everything that's old is new again, even bell bottoms. So we're
Hey, I have my bell bottoms.
Yeah.
And the thing that really resonated with me when T was talking was about those skills. And those are skills that in the past have gotten the label of being soft skills. We think of those as infrastructure. And they're things that you really can't learn from a book or from a seminar. They're concepts that are best learned through practice.
Yeah. And we all know that takes a lot of hours.
Yep.
But there's lots of opportunity to practice these days, right?
Oh, yes, there definitely is.
I'd say practice and support, right?
Yeah.
Because the perception that we have of ourselves sometimes is different than the perceptions that others have of us. And you need both.
Well, I think that's a great point because that feedback mechanism is critical to your growth, right? So, Emmy, are you seeing, is tech changing the role of the leader from your perspective? And I know I'm challenging you there you can put money in the swear jar if you want.
Well, no, here's where I'm going to go. I mean, we just heard a great definition of leadership and what's required of leaders. What tech is going to do for us is augment our intelligence as a leader. I like to save my dollars. So it's going to reshape leadership in a way that gives leaders more data to be able to align, to communicate, to engage employees, to understand what the gaps really are. So data is really important in that, and the technology provides that. The challenge is going to be not to always look for a technical solution, right? Because leadership is more than technology, and technology is a great tool, but it's not leadership. And so using technical tools that do more than a task that at this point in time purport to provide thought leadership or make moral decisions or anything like that. I think it's too early in time. I don't think we have the skills as humans to know how to do that properly. So when it comes to leadership, it really is using the data, the technical tools give us, as well as finding that thought that just flew across the ceiling here that I was going to say that was profound.
Come to you. Always does.
We all have those profound thoughts, and I have a tendency when I'm talking on these calls to make like little word notes because they continue talking and I get so engrossed in what's being said, I completely forget what I thought was really cool and wanted to ask about. So yeah, no, that's great. I agree. There's a lot of tech out there and there's a lot of bright, shiny objects, right? So,
Yeah.
but, I think looking at that with a very thoughtful mind and process about how can this augment what I'm doing and help me do, because as leaders, we still have these sort of administrative things we have to do. You can only add so many resources to the pool, right? So there's still things that we have to do. Anything we can do to help us do those things faster so that we can be out there with clients, with our employees, with the people in our communities to help, drive that, drive the process and the brand that we're trying to build in the market, right?
Yeah, one thing you reminded me of when you said bright, shiny objects is our tendency to go and buy them
Mm.
constantly, and we don't stay and actually strategize how we're going to use them and stay to wait for results.
Yeah.
It's, oh, there's something even better down the line. So being very intentional and purposeful about what you want to have happen and how you want to lead is critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Susan, a lot of this comes back to the leadership that we bring to the organization, right? And strong leadership ideally leads to a strong culture, but is there more to the story there? I know we talked a lot about in the paper about adaptive culture. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we mean by that and how culture fits into this bigger picture?
Yeah, we see culture as being the lifeblood of the organization, and leadership and culture are intertwined to a point that you really can't pull them apart. And there's also change that gets mixed in, and it's like a constant push, pull, and balance. Leadership is definitely going to influence your culture. If you've ever been in an organization that brought in a new leader, a new CEO that behaved very differently than your past CEO, the culture changed pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. And so their leadership can have a very significant impact on your culture from the top down, can also have an impact from the bottom up. We have this saying about, is your culture words on the wall, or are you really walking the walk? And no matter who you are, whether you're a individual contributor, a manager, mid-level manager, or a senior leader, making sure that you understand the culture of the organization and that you reinforce that at every opportunity makes a huge difference. It takes a long time to build a strong culture, and it only takes a few things to tear it apart. Anything that degrades the trust in the organization, if I tell you I'm going to do one thing as the CEO and I do exactly the opposite, then it introduces mistrust and erodes our culture. So culture is a very fragile but yet strong concept from where we sit.
Yeah. And we've seen some of that in recent days and weeks, with social media. It's so easy now to potentially have your culture erode quickly with information that's getting out there. So being able to act quickly when those things happen is key, and organizations need to pay attention to that. Emmy, what are some of the key elements of what we're calling this adaptive culture? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, in my career, I was very fortunate to grow up in an adaptive culture. It was because you have to be willing to deal with whatever's at hand. So you need curiosity, you need to have a learning mindset, you need to create psychological safety. People need to be able to speak up, to give ideas, to know they can fail, to make mistakes, and you actually have to learn from your mistakes. There's a saying I often use. We often talk about lessons observed. It's really should be, we've learned the lesson and we're going to do something different. So there's agility there, there's inclusion, there's resilience, constant feedback. You talked about feedback earlier, but it's how do you balance stability with flexibility? How do you stay grounded while things are just kind of happening around you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. T, how important is culture to driving business results? Because we go back to those things that we talked about earlier. Again, they don't just happen in a vacuum because you've got smart people.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things impacting the organization and how they get there, right? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So knowing our audience here, what I'm going to say is culture is like a hidden operating system of any
Ooh.
type of organization, right? So you can have the best strategy in the world, but if the culture doesn't support it, think about like it's trying to run new software on an old, outdated, piece of hardware, right? It just doesn't work. So results are never just about, a leader declaring what needs to be done. They are about, and we're going to sound repetitive, but it is so core to what's important here because it is about their behaviors. It is about the trust. It is about the energy that culture can be, and can actually make possible. Because if you want results that last, you have to cultivate a culture that sustains them. I am sure that there are toxic cultures that still get results, right? But the challenge from those organizations are going to be sustainable employee engagement and loyalty, right? Because over time, their results are going to suffer once the people start leaving or giving up or quiet quitting, so to speak. But culture is so important. I just can't stress enough about how important it is to ensure that an individual's core values, at least some of them, align with the culture of the organization in which they work. Because in cases where we've had some of our clients where their values were not met, not enough of the values were met, they were unhappy. And a lot of times they were even miserable. So I actually had a client who shared with me once that she pulled into the underground parking lot of her company. She parked the car, and as she reached over the passenger seat to grab her briefcase, she put on her mask because she could not afford to be her authentic self due to the culture of her organization. Now, over time, she decided to leave the company, so that was healthy for her. But it just shows you. I mean, I even recall. I mean, we talk sometimes too about the study that another national, very well-known consulting firm did many, many years ago. I want to say it was probably over 20, and they reported that 61% of their participants admitted to leaving a big chunk of who they were at the door before they walked into work. Well, 10 years later, they did a similar study, and the percentage changed to a whopping 1%. It's down to 60%. So it's a clear indication of how protective we sometimes need to be or can be of our whole self. And especially when our work culture doesn't align with who we are. And that just the stuff that truly breaks my heart and is a shame. So, yes, you can have results just, in spite of your culture, but culture will drive the type of results, the sustainable results, and the people results that an organization is going to want.
Yeah. This makes me think about, in organizations that I've been in the past where we, there was a tendency to let high performers or good performers have a pass, even if they weren't walking the walk, as we talked about earlier, which is really confusing to staff and can have a major impact on culture, right? When you've got people in a leadership role that are acting contrary to what the culture of the business is, it's just, yeah, it's difficult.
It is. And, we do a lot of different types of workshops, one of them around kind of the gravitas that leaders need to have. And we talk about three components that are really important. It's performance, it's image, and it's exposure. And having one without the other is not good. So to your point, you're explaining a situation or sharing a situation where, the performance is actually overriding the image that an organization wants this individual to have or that he should be having or she should be having. So, yeah, think about image is really what your culture is too, how you're perceived by others. And it's just so important to be consistent. That's where the rubber hits the road and the slippery slope can happen as we've talked about a few minutes ago.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you guys talked about in the paper was the outside in view, right? What our customers see as our brand, which to me is an extension of the culture, right? And the inside out view from the employees.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And when they are aligned, it is magic.
It's beautiful.
When they are misaligned, it is misery.
Yeah. Susan, we love instant gratification. It's like literally the way of the world, at least in the US, I know, right? How do we ensure we're building something that's going to drive, long-term gains versus just the short-term gains we get for like the big things, right?
Yeah. I wish I had a magic bullet to answer that. The real answer is that it takes time and it requires consistency and clarity and support. Doing what we say we're going to do, showing up and doing that consistently over time is how we build a strong culture. And knowing when you have to change, talking about why you have to change. So not jumping onto the bandwagon of whatever the flavor of the day is, but being thoughtful and intentional about the new products, the new services that we're introducing into our organization, and asking the question, how will this change impact our culture? How will our leadership team show up and support this new thing that we're doing, or this way that we're evolving? And being really clear about the messaging to all of our audiences, internal and external.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that stick-to-itiveness, right? It kind of goes back to that bright, shiny object. It's easy, even as leaders, for us to get lost on or focused on the thing of the day, right? And to not pay as much attention to here's what we said we were going to do.
Mhm.
Here's the model, and nothing's going to get in our way of sort of continuing that, right?
Definitely. The one thing I'm a great fan of is neuroscience, right?
Yeah.
And the ability to engage folks in such a way when it comes to change, especially, is to help them find a way, actually communicate in such a way, reinforce in such a way that brings them along and kind of ends the resistance for the change, for what you're trying to have happen, and to stay the course. My favorite word, stay.
Yes. Stay
Yeah.
the course. Love that. T, at least from my perspective, and I've talked about this a bit lately in my CEO corner, and I did a session at World at Work about trust and how important that is across the organization. I mean, it's critical, and it's also not easy to come by, right? It's easy, similar to what we talked about a few minutes ago. It takes a long time to come by. It's very easy to lose. And we get constantly challenged as leaders about how we communicate and to whom. What do you see there? What do you think is the challenge?
I don't know about you, but I don't know very many people that are hopeful about the world of work. And I'd like to change that. My name's Marcus Mossberger, and I started the Hope at Work podcast, where you'll find two things. Number one, really interesting guests, and number two, innovative ideas about the future of work. Check it out.
On the communication, again, communication is one of the biggest leadership challenges of our time. I would tell you that without exception, over the hundreds of coaching clients that Emmy and I have had, communication is always part of the work that we do together. I mean, think about from a leadership perspective, maybe more at that mid and even at the executive level, you have to be, multilingual, so to speak, knowing how to talk to your team, knowing how to talk to your peers, maybe even the board, external stakeholders. Sometimes has to be a bit different, but you cannot also lose your authenticity because people, if you think about what they value in communication from others, it isn't always just being that polished, have their act together all the time. It's more about how clear or how consistent does somebody communicate with them. They want to believe that what you're saying is aligned with what you're doing, similar to what we've said before, right? Walking the talk. It's part of, behaving the way that you say is important. But this is part of what leaders can miss is when we talk about communication, it isn't just about what they're saying, it's about how well they also listen. We talk a lot about the 4 C's, which is connecting with people first, allows you then to have greater communication. Greater communication will lead to heightened collaboration. And when that happens, you actually create a culture where everyone knows that they're valued and that the work they do matters. And as Susan said earlier, it just is, over the top fulfilling and fun. And so for communications, I think leaders need to be, again, you hear these words from us often, but it's true, purposeful. They need to understand the tone of their voice, the cadence, the word choice. Word choice is something that we talk a lot about because people take for granted the impact of their words. And again, people who are working fast and furiously fly by the seat of their pants. And so the reason why these soft skills can be hard is because it takes time. It takes attention. And that's where I think from a communication perspective, leaders will benefit most from is, again, heightening their self-awareness, getting some insight into the impact they have when they communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that's important to me there is the medium, because it's very easy to write a big long email or to respond to somebody quickly in text thinking, okay, I'm just going to get them the answer really quick, but not thinking about how that message is going to come across in, a couple of acronyms and 5 words in a text.
Absolutely. And I always tell the story because I have permission. Early on in my career, I was working with a gentleman who he was having issues with his team and they just didn't feel supported by him at all. Long story short, after doing interviews and all that stuff, what we found out was they kept saying he yells at us all the time. He simply wrote all of his emails in all capital letters because it was the ease of the keyboard for him. He had no concept that it was being interpreted so vastly different than he anticipated. So this is the other thing I think about communication is it is about also having the open channel to provide the feedback of the impact of your communication, because it's unfair to an individual for others to harbor these assumptions and never share them, because then how do you learn?
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes me think about, one of the mantras that I'm paying attention to more now is words matter, and the weight
Yes.
of our words matter. So depending on where we sit in the organization, our words carry different weight. And I think one of the things that I learned the hard way was when I was leading a team, and it was a project in trouble. They needed a new regional VP, and I came in as the interim, and I was doing everything I could to help my team and help them get better. And what I learned, I couldn't understand why people were avoiding me. And my chief of staff came into me one day and he said, "Susan, I need you to stop sending emails in the middle of the night. You have freaked our team out, and they feel like you're never sleeping and you're always watching them, and they don't know how to support you."
So you're the reason Microsoft created that capability to send your emails later.
And more people need to know about that.
Yes, they do.
And I had no idea that my words were having that sort of impact on my team. They were terrified. And so I don't know if Microsoft had that feature at that point in time, but I made sure that I only sent out my emails, between business hours going forward.
Yeah.
And life got a lot better. And it's that kind of stuff that is maybe a little thing to the person who's doing what they're doing that's not working, but something huge to the folks that they're working with.
Yeah. Well, Susan, that brings me to something else I want to talk about, which is I feel like all roads lead back to change management, especially in this sort of fourth industrial revolution or whatever we're calling it. I mean, I'm kind of calling it the age of intelligence. what are some of the elements of leading change that are so important right now?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, we could talk for hours about this, but I think some of the key elements about leading change right now are listening, paying attention to what's happening in your environment, being very intentional about the change that you introduce, and being able to talk about why. And being honest about why. I mean, if we're going to introduce something into the environment that is going to eliminate positions, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it early so that our team can make other plans, whether that's to find another role in our organization or to make plans for starting their own firm or going and finding a different job. I just think it's really important for us to be as transparent as possible in this age of rapid change. You know, T talked about trust. If we want to build trust, we have to be authentic. We have to be as transparent and honest as we can possibly be and talk about why we're changing, what's changing, what that impact is going to be on each stakeholder group. And that requires a lot of work. No longer can we say, oh, just get on board or get off. It's how is this going to impact each one of our group of stakeholders, and understanding how to talk to them in a language that they understand and that will resonate with them.
Yeah. I mean, change management, it's always been important, especially when it comes to tech adoption, right? It's pretty critical. But the reality is, anytime we're trying to move people from one way of working or thinking to something else, there's a process, right? It doesn't just happen organically.
No, you're exactly right. And Susan just really answered the question. And it's how do you send the message on why the change is important, how it affects them, what they can do about it, what their role is. The questions that you're sitting here going, I am scared, I have fear, right? It's what we automatically do as humans. How do you allay that fear? How do you create the resilience, the inclusion, the connection that says to the employee, it's going to be okay, as best as we can make it okay,
Yeah.
right? We have a
Yeah.
plan, we have a strategy. So it really is a chance to address, to be aware of and to address what the employee has to deal with the change. And also the stakeholders. I mean, it's not just the employee, but your clients, your consumers, depending what business you're in. It's thinking the bigger picture and understanding that everybody has a different concern. And how do you build that into your strategy going forward when it comes to the change?
Yeah.
It's a piece of cake.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, one
It's
person
not
could do
like,
this, right? Yeah, just put one person on the program and
Right.
they can do this.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, and
It's not
actually,
just make it so, right? It's
Yeah.
that there's a lot of pieces and parts to that.
well, and Susan has given a great presentation on peer-to-peer, getting your peers on board with the change,
Yeah.
because again, it won't just be your organization that's affected. It ripples out.
Yeah. Those are some of the most important people, I think, in that sort of change team is your peers. It's
Mhm.
one thing for the leaders to be telling you something is coming or something's going to happen. It's another thing when your peer is telling you, "Oh, have you tried this? Have you gotten started on this? Or this is going to be really great, or here's what we're going to get out of it." It's, to me, those are probably the most imperative when it comes to making it happen.
And
The other group that we look for to add to a change team are the influencers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, you as an organization leader know who has the influence, and they're not necessarily the people who have power. They have that informal power or soft power. They're the ones that everybody goes to find out what's happening and what's really going on and where the bodies might be buried. So find your influencers and engage them and talk to them about what's happening and why it's happening, and they will become some of your greatest champions. They can also be some of your greatest critics, but if you can win them over, or at least neutralize and answer the concerns, then you're headed in a good path for leading change.
Yeah, and you know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Tia, what's on the horizon? What are some of the challenges that leaders should be on the lookout for?
Ooh. Well, there are a few. Obviously, the one that shall not be named with those two letters there, the impact of
They
that.
want to hold on to their dollars.
Exactly. The
We are
automation.
not going to have a very good party, ladies.
Okay, in the spirit of supporting the team, the impact of AI and automation, right? I mean, some jobs are evolving faster than organizations can reskill some of their people. So that is, I think, a lot of what the conversation is about right now. But I think that, another obviously then, and some of these are not new, but they continue to be challenges, is the burnout and or disengagement, right? We
Mhm.
again touched on this when employees are not just, they're not asking, what do I do? But they want to know, why does it matter in what I'm doing? I think somebody referenced this earlier on too, and it again, unfortunately, we do have a lot of volatility, right? The geopolitical stuff, the environmental, some societal stuff that's going on. It isn't in the background anymore. It's not just noise in the background. It's coming in, and it directly can shape, markets and workforces. So I think we have to be cognizant of that. And then I would say, not to be a broken record, but last and definitely not least is trust, right? We are living in a time where trust in institutions and even trust in information can be very shaky. So leaders who can't build and maintain trust will really struggle. It's funny because a lot of people talk about, how do I trust other people? Well, we like to turn the tables and ask people, how will you be trustworthy? So, in support of that approach, we actually have a little trust equation that we have utilized from this company. It's called the Trust Advisor Associates. And I want to just share it real quickly because this seems to resonate with a lot of people. And this is something maybe that people listening to this could kind of take a look at and say, where do you fall in this equation? And it's the numerator is C+R+I, and that means credibility, which obviously speaks to your knowledge and your expertise and how believable you are in what you say and know. R stands for reliability, and that reflects the consistent behavior and the ability to follow through on the promises that you make. I is intimacy. And that actually measures how comfortable others feel confiding in you, right? The level of emotional safety that Emmy mentioned before. There's a play on words sometimes that we use of intimacy that also says into me, see, which is another facet, meaning how vulnerable are you with others? How authentically do you show up? What will motivate others to be honest with you and not to hold back information that might be helpful to you as a leader? So your intimacy will contribute to your impact. So the watch out though of this is, that's a great numerator, but there's a denominator called self-orientation, and that refers to the degree in which motives are seen by others as self-serving rather than focused on others. So I'll just give you one example. So if I came to this team and I said, look, I need to get this data for an investor review tomorrow for us, that may not hit as well as to say, you know what, we'll have a better shot at some funding from this organization if we can get this data complete by tomorrow. So in essence, the most trusted individuals are those who consistently demonstrate expertise, dependability, connection, and genuine care for others, while they're also keeping their own personal agenda in check. So when people think about trust, we'd like you to embrace the concept of, how trustworthy are you? That will help with the bigger picture of trust in an organization.
Yeah, I love that. I'm, put the word trust on your wall, write it on your bulletin board, put it on a sticky note on your laptop or your screen, whatever it takes, and remind yourself of everything you do. What is trust? And how are you communicating it, or how are you, what's the right word, conveying trust to others and trusting others? If you
Mhm.
don't trust in others, you're going to have a hard time delivering things in a trustworthy way.
Well, and we talk about leaders modeling behavior, right?
Yeah.
So if we model the trustworthiness. Again, I'll repeat, C+R+I divided by SO.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. We'll put it in the message when it goes out on social. Um,
I'm seeing a little postcard handout that has our formula on it for
yeah.
trust.
Yeah. I like it. So, ladies, we are running short on time. I want to do a speed round and see if there's anything that you want to leave the audience with today as it relates to leadership and culture and what we've been talking about here, and hopefully give them a reason to want to read this paper. Susan.
It may have already been said, but the thing that I'd like to leave everybody with is that you are a leader. It doesn't matter where you sit in your organization, whether you're a gig worker or a CEO or a middle manager or an individual contributor. You are a leader in your own right, and the behavior that you exhibit has tremendous influence on others that are around you, and you just never know who is watching and who is looking to you as a role model.
Yeah. Great point. And me.
So I'm going to be a little practical. The thing I want to leave with is be curious. What are you reacting to? How are you reacting? And remember to breathe. Take the pause, wait to talk, listen.
Yeah. Don't overreact.
Mhm.
T, what do you got?
Well, I would say that leadership, culture, and change is a three-legged stool, right? Leadership sets the tone, culture sustains that behavior, and change is the test because you can't drive change without a culture that doesn't embrace it. And you can't create the culture without leaders who model it. So at the end of the day, when leadership inspires, culture enables, change pushes us to prove that we're both real, that it's all three that are important, not one more than the other. And you know me, I have one other thing, which is at the end of the day, leadership is an investment. It's an investment of time, it's an investment of energy. And most people look at an investment initially as how much do I have to spend? We look at that as the last, because if you don't dedicate the time and the energy, it's not going to matter. But you need to do that. If you want to be a brilliant leader, if you want to have brilliant leadership across your organization, investment of time and energy is going to be critical to have all three of the three legs of the stool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not of the, a lot of people think that leadership is natural. Oh, they're a natural. It can be made. Leaders do not have to be born. There are some great leaders that are born, but the majority of us are made, right? And we control that.
Well, and hopefully great leaders want to be even better. So that's where our saying is, yes, we
Yeah.
can go from good to great, but you can also go from great to brilliant because the
Yeah.
impact that you have is what's important. And brilliant leadership will have that ripple effect that is just bar none.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Read this paper.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies, T, Emmy, Susan, for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. We're going to have to do a phase 2 because I know there's some other pieces and parts to this that we're going to continue to work on and put out there to help drive and help the community lead within their organizations. So thank you all so much. Want to remind people that we just came out of HR Tech last week. This paper's out. There's some other papers from this year's survey results that are out, and we are diligently working on getting the rest of that paper out by the end of October. So be on the lookout for that, as well as the webinar that we'll do to talk about those results. Thank you guys. I want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group, Kelly and her team, I want to thank our marketing team, Kendall and Summer, and I want to thank you for tuning in. That's all the time we have for this week's episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Also leave us a review or send us a note online, send us a chat, drop us a chat on the website. We want to hear from you about what you want us to talk about, and we can bring some of those challenges to this conversation. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.